Hey everybody, it's Joe with J Blake Photo. I really got to apologize. I know it's been a while since I uploaded a video. I don't know how many of you are actually like watching with bated breath for me to upload videos, but if you are, first of all, I appreciate it. Second of all, it has just been a super busy time for me, both with my trip ending, busyness with the 9 to 5, and then also, it was Easter weekend, so there's a lot going on. I've got a lot to talk about in the next couple of weeks. I've got some great footage to show you real soon, but today I want to talk about settings on the Mavic Pro, some of the stuff that I learned and some of the stuff that I did to make my Mavic Pro footage just as amazing as possible on my most recent trip. I want to thank everybody who has subscribed to my channel. Like I said, I haven't been uploading a whole lot of videos in the last couple of weeks. I've been super busy, but I have picked up a ton of subscribers. I mean, it's small for YouTube. It's like 50 people, but I appreciate all 50 of you. I really do. I think it's great that you're interested in the content that I'm creating. I'm going to create more of this content. And so, let's just kind of keep on doing this thing. But I really appreciate everybody who has liked these videos. I got 100 likes on one of my videos for the first time ever, but having over 300 subscribers with, only having, I think like 50 or 60 videos and really just trying this for the last couple of months, I'm really excited. I want to just thank everybody who's been commenting, who's been subscribing and liking these videos. Okay, so for the record, leaning back in a chair while holding your camera is not a good look. I have like 8 chins. Also, why am I so shiny? Anyway, here's the intro. Okay, I gotta put this thing down. It is super heavy. Okay, that's better. What I wanted to talk about was some of the settings that I used when I was flying the Mavic Pro. Mavic Pro did a phenomenal job just flying all over the place. I took the Mavic Pro above Monument Valley, Dead Horse Point, through Canyonlands, over the Colorado River, the Salt Bench, and then flew it not into Zion National Park, but I got real close. And if you haven't seen some of that video, it's either because I haven't released it yet, because not all of it is done, not all of it's been edited, or just because you haven't watched it yet. So check out the day 1, 2, 3, 4 videos of my national park trip that I did a couple of weeks ago. But like I said, some of those are still coming. So like I said, the Mavic Pro performed admirably on the trip. It did an amazing job. The only thing that I had trouble with, and it wasn't with the Mavic itself, it was actually with the controller. So the problem that I had with the controller was that the cable over here just frayed and started giving me a lot of connection issues. But no fault, honestly. Just I'm probably just not very good at keeping this, and also the little clip that keeps the cable in. I lost that like on day 2. But otherwise, and again, no knock on the Mavic, more just cables bust. I went a little higher than I should have on some of my shots. I think I went as high as 1,400 feet. And I also went about 10,000 to 11,000 feet out. I think that was my farthest trip. But just, I can't say enough about how phenomenally this drone performed. Now, the other thing that this makes me think is that even though it has the lower bitrate 4K than the Mavic Air, I'm so glad that I have the radio frequency, the additional connection between this and the drone, because otherwise I would not have been able to get many of the shots that I got. So, super fun. So what I want to talk about is just how I've been setting up the Mavic. Okay, so I'm going to hook the iPhone up to the Mavic here. We can get all the beeps and boops. I'm going to turn on the controller here. Controller is dead. Okay, now the controller is charged. I always forget to charge this thing. So we're gonna go ahead and turn this thing on. Now it's on. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and launch the DJI app, and I'm gonna record my iPhone screen while I do it. This is gonna be kind of a fun experiment here. Okay, so we've got the DJI app running. I've got the drone hooked up. I've got a little shot set up right here. Okay, so that you can kind of see what we're looking at here. So here's what I normally do. So number one, if you look in the upper right-hand corner here, you've got these settings for the camera. So right now we are in movie mode, and you can see that the ISO is set to 200, the shutter is set to 30, or 1/30th of a second, and the EV, or just the value of the meter, is -3. So it's 1/3 of a stop under what kind of the value that it's perceiving is. And we're set to 4K, and we're set to 30 frames a second. Okay, so I don't always shoot at 4K 30, but for this particular kind of demonstration, we'll say that I am. Okay, so what we're gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and tap underneath the kind of red record button here. You'll see these lines with the little circles on them. Okay, and that's gonna bring us up our video settings panel. So right now it's set to auto. I don't normally shoot in the auto mode, and here's why. If I'm looking for cinematic footage, if I'm setting it on auto, number one, it's not going to be dialed in like I want. It's not going to give me the look that I want. And also, depending on how I move or position the drone, it could change wildly as it adjusts. And I want to try and keep the look the same, regardless of where I'm pointing the drone. So basically, if the drone settings need to change, if the video settings need to change as a result of the environment, I want to be the one to change them. I don't want the camera to do it on its own. So now I'm going to go ahead and change this to manual. So now it's set it to manual, and you'll see that it has automatically set the ISO to 100, which is the lowest level, and it has set the shutter speed to 1/320th. And then underneath there, you've got a little histogram. If you're not sure about the histogram, I might do a video about that, but the basics are this. You want a lot of it in the middle. You don't want spikes on either side. If you've got a spike on one side, it means it's too dark. If you've got a spike on the other side, it means it's too bright. You want stuff in the middle. So right now, as you can see, we've got everything over to the left. So what we want is we want to even that out, number one. The other thing that you can see is now that EV has gone from -0.3, or one stop, or rather a third of a stop under normal, to 2 full stops under. And that's going to be pretty difficult to resolve any detail out of. So we want to go ahead and bring that up. And the way that we're going to do that to start is we're going to go ahead and change this to a different shutter speed, and I'm going to change that to 1/60th. Now in this particular case, it's still too dark, so I'm going to bring the ISO up to 800. Now we're at 1 1/3 stop under, but our histogram looks like there's a lot more detail in the middle. I'm also just going to tap here just to focus a little bit more. So now what we have is an image that's a lot more balanced, and we've got a lot more detail. Some of the things that I've learned about these settings on the Mavic, number one, is that really anything over 200 ISO, I personally find to be just real mushy. It doesn't seem to have really great detail. So I try as hard as I can to keep it at 100 or 200 ISO. Anything above 400, 800, I don't like to use at all. If you have a Mavic Pro and you're using ISO 800, let me know in the comments. Maybe even link me a copy of one of your videos that you've shot with that. I've shot around sunset. I've had to push it that far. I just don't like the footage that I get out of it. It just doesn't look as good. Okay, so now in this shot, we've got everything kind of in the middle. We don't have anything overexposed or underexposed. Everything looks relatively okay. Let's go back into those settings. And one of the things that you'll see is I've set it to 1/60th of a second. And I could get some additional light by changing this to 1/30th of a second. You'll see that things will get a lot brighter. I could probably even bring the ISO down, get a little bit more detail on my image. But the problem that you run into there is, remember from previous videos, I've talked about the 180 rule. If you look at my last video about vlog settings on the DSLR, the rule is the same on the DSLR as it is on the drone. If you're shooting at a shutter speed of 1/30th of a second, which I am here at 4K, you want to make sure that your shutter speed is double what your frame rate is. So if you're running at a frame rate of 1/30th of a second, or 30 frames per second, you want that to be doubled in your shutter speed, or 1/60th of a second. So your shutter speed is twice as fast as your frame rate. What that's going to give you is good clear picture, but you're still going to get a little bit of natural motion blur in your images. If you go down to 1/30th of a second, you're going to end up with a lot of motion blur. Every frame will be fully blurred, and then again, it gets real mushy. You can go up a little bit further. You can go all the way up to, on the Mavic, I often will shoot at 1/100th or 1/120th, even if I'm still shooting at 30 frames a second or 1/30th of a second. And I do that because I just find that it creates a crisper, sharper image on the Mavic Pro. Again, anything that I have to do to keep it at ISO 100 or 200, I will do. Now, in a bright and sunny day, you might find yourself thinking, okay, but there's a ton of light. I can't get down to 1/60th of a second and ISO 100. There's just no way. The drone in a lot of cases will want to push 1/1000th of a second, and then everything is super choppy and jittery. So what you're going to want to get is an ND filter. I've talked about these previously for DSLRs, but I use them on my drone, especially when I'm flying during the middle of the day. So what I use are these Polar Pro ND filters. And this one is an ND16, and it really does help a lot. What it actually does is it does the same thing on the drone as it does on the DSLR. It will actually reduce the light being let into the lens. So on days that are bright and sunny, where you want to be flying around, but you also want to make sure that you get smooth cinematic motion blur, you can go ahead and throw that on the lens. It clips on really easily, and you get a much better quality of video as you're flying around. And then you can set your settings to 1/60th of a second or 1/100th of a second, and you can keep your ISO at 100 and still get crisp, clean images. Nothing will be blown out, and you'll be able to really kind of manipulate your settings as you wish. Okay, so now moving on from the camera settings, I want to go just into these kind of format settings, and I want to talk a little bit more about how I'm setting up the Mavic Pro. So I've got my video size set to 4K 30. Some of the other options that you have here are the 4K 24. I don't normally shoot with that because YouTube sometimes has issues with 24 frames per second. I've never really experimented with the 2.7K, although from what I understand, it's really nice. And then you've got the 1080p. Now, if we switch to 1080p, it defaults to the 24 frames per second. I'm going to set it to 30. So I almost always shoot at 30 frames a second. So if I'm shooting at 1080p 30, I do the exact same thing that I do when I'm shooting at 4K 30. I make sure that I've got my shutter speed at 1/60th of a second, and I've got my ISO as low as I can take it. But the Mavic Pro does have these additional options: 48 frames a second, 60 frames a second, and 96 frames per second. So I have tried the 96 frames per second thing. To my mind, it looks horrible. It looks absolutely terrible. I would never shoot with it. If you are shooting with the Mavic Pro and you're using the 96 frames per second, please send me a clip of that video and tell me how you have it configured, because I have not been able to get anything good out of it. You get a lot of vertical lines. It just looks bad. So let me know. I would love to hear about that. You also have the 720p, and you can set that to 120 frames per second. So if I had done that, right, if I set the 720p at 120 frames per second, then what I would want to do is I would want to go ahead and set this guy to 240th or 1/240th of a second. Now, to get the light out of that, I'm really going to have to boost the ISO, which, as you can just see right there, is giving us a ton of noise and just does not look very good at all. That's the slow-mo mode. I've never really used it. Maybe I'll experiment with it at some point, but I haven't really had a use for it. So now if we set this back to our 4K 30 frames per second, and we look down at the video format. So the video format options that you have here are MP4 and MOV. From everything that I've read and everything that I understand, there is no difference. This is simply a container format. If you're running on I've heard people say that if you're using a Mac, you should use the MOV file, and if you're running a PC, you should use the .mp4. I have a Mac. I could use the .mp4 extension. It really wouldn't make a difference. Adobe Premiere on a Windows machine will handle MOV just fine as long as you have QuickTime installed. So I'm not really sure what the point of that is. If anybody's using MOV on a Windows machine or MP4 on a Mac and you see a benefit, let me know. But from everything that I've read, all the literature that I've read and all the testing that I've done, there's no difference in these formats. NTSC and PAL, that's a long conversation. If you're in the United States, you're going to want to use NTSC. White balance. So here's an interesting one. I've been going back and forth about this one. For white balance, if you set it to auto, then the imaging sensor is going to automatically set your white balance based on what's in the frame. I've actually had some shots where the drone launches and I'm recording, and it actually changes the white balance mid-shot, and it ruins the shot. So in a lot of cases, what I'm doing is I'm setting this to one particular setting and just kind of keeping it there. So in this particular case, maybe we'll set it to incandescent. We could even set it to fluorescent. That doesn't look too bad. That way, as you change or as your environment changes, the video won't change around it, which personally I think is better, because when you're talking about white balance, you're talking about color. And you don't want your color changing in the middle of a shot. I actually tried to adjust against it in color correction using Final Cut. It was a mess. So don't do that. Okay, I'm going to go back and I'm going to change these settings back down to 60, and we're going to go back to 400 ISO. Okay, the next thing is style. So these are incremental changes that you can make to the image. There's a number of things. So you've got sharpness, you've got contrast, and you've got saturation. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to back the drone up just a little bit so that we get a good amount of focusing on this stuff here. I try to make sure that it can focus on these items. Okay, I'm going to tap to focus here. Okay, there we go. And now I'm going to go ahead and tap this here, and I am going to set this to landscape. Now, what landscape does is add just a little bit of sharpness and a little bit of contrast. I've tried this in the past, and I find that when I'm flying over areas that have a lot of contrasty, textured, or detailed areas, like water or trees, that this becomes very crunchy, and it's very hard to remove. I normally stay at 000. I've had people that tell me that you've got to stay at -100 or +101, all sorts of different things. Personally, I've been staying at 000, and I prefer it. You can also go soft, or you can go custom. So for example, you can really kind of push the sharpness here and get a lot of that crunchiness. You can add additional saturation, or rather additional contrast, and you can add all the saturation that you want. So you can just go crazy and really blow out that whole image. I don't know what you're flying your drone for, but when I'm flying my drone, it's for the purposes of cinematic shots that I want to then edit later and incorporate into my video. If I'm pushing this much processing inside the camera, inside the device itself, then just like with my DSLR, I limit my ability to do editing in post. So really what I want to be doing is I want to be reducing these to as low as they'll go. Okay, so that's my style. So now, the last one here is color. So you've heard me talk a ton about log and shooting in flat log profiles. I personally prefer the D-Log. I think it gives you a nice flat profile, and then you can go into any of these other ones just to kind of check them out. But if your intention is to edit your footage, whether it's on your iPad, on your iPhone, or on your computer using Adobe Premiere, or using DaVinci Resolve, or using Final Cut Pro, or even using like iMovie, and you plan on using any kind of video or color effects later, shoot in log. It will give you a nice flat surface to work with, and it'll make sure that all of your darks and your highlights, that they resolve properly. If you just plan to literally cut this thing up and upload it straight to the web, or maybe you're just showing it to friends, you're going to want to use, in my mind, the normal setting. Anything beyond the normal setting, I find, unless you have a real specific reason to do it, I don't know. I don't like any of these. I just like going with a nice flat profile, because then I get as much information on the video as possible. And then I have stuff to do with it later. Okay, last but not least, here are some of the additional settings that we've got in here. So you can turn the histogram on and off. I like to have that because then you know that you're not clipping your highlights or crushing your blacks. And then you've got all of these other things. Honestly, some of this stuff is going to be important. It really kind of depends on what you are doing with your drone, but play with those. Decide what's best for you. This is more kind of creature comfort individual items for you, but some of them can be really nice depending on how you set them up. Let me turn this thing. This thing is so loud. Oh, that's better. Okay. So depending on what you're shooting, depending on how you're shooting, these are some of the settings that I'm using. So really, I try and keep my settings the same so that when I'm applying things like LUTs, they apply the same way so that I'm not having to really adjust separately for each shot. You're going to have enough work adjusting for the scene that you shot. Why have your settings be different every time? So shooting that good cinematic, nice smooth with a little bit of that motion blur with that 1/60th of a second shutter speed with 30 frames a second, or if you're going to shoot at 60 frames a second, if you have the Mavic Air or the Phantom and you want to up that level and you're getting good quality out of it, shoot at 1/20th in terms of your shutter speed. So there's lots of options, lots of controls that you can play with on this thing. Those are the settings that I've used recently. I'm trying to get better at remembering to check my settings every time I fly my drone. There have been a ton of times where I just pull off to the side of the road, I see something cool, I want to fly the drone, I want to get great video, and then I get it back and then I pop it into the computer when I get home and I go, oh, I forgot that setting, or oh, I forgot to change this or change that. So I'm trying to be more disciplined and remember to make these changes when I am flying my drone. So I hope this video has been helpful. If you've got cool settings that you're using on the Mavic, or if you know some sort of trick that makes your stuff just amazing, don't hesitate to send it to me. Put a link down in the comments. If you like this video, go ahead and hit the like button. That helps a ton for me. And if you can subscribe to this channel, if you're not already, although you probably are, but if you're not, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. And I really appreciate it. I'm going to continue doing videos like this. I'm going to continue doing the vlogs and flying the drones and doing all the cool stuff. If there's something specific that you'd like to see, shoot me a shout out. Also, I do read all of the comments. I try as hard as I can to respond to every one of them. I know lately I've been neglecting that, but I really do try and answer questions as much as I can. If you have a specific question, hit me up on Twitter. I am at jblakephotog with a G at the end. I'll put a little thing here down at the bottom. Hit me up on Twitter or hit me up on Instagram. But if you have a question, hit me up on Twitter or go ahead and put it in the comments down below. All right, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks, everybody.